We're welcoming Dave this morning. We all know him well. But I wanted to take the opportunity to talk about Love India. And some of you are thinking, well, what's Love India? Well, Love India is the school that we give to in Delhi is part of Love India. So I want to talk to him about that. Now, there's a video that goes with this, but we decided that the screen, you wouldn't be able to see it. So it's going to go up online, and I do recommend that you look at the video. It's a report from India about what Love India is doing, okay? But I'm going to start with some really, really difficult questions. How did your involvement with Love India develop, Dave?
Well, trying to cut a long story short, way back in 1984, I was very young at the time. Rin and I were invited to go and speak at a leaders conference in Belgium, and our friends who were running it had brought leaders from various different nations of the world, and we were due to arrive to speak one morning, but we were held up, so we got there just before lunchtime, and we went in, and what they did every day at lunchtime was they called somebody forward and prayed for that person and the nation. So we hadn't been there long, and they asked this Indian lady with her baby to come to the front, and we started to pray for her. But before we did, the host said, it's very easy to pray for all these nations, but can I ask you just to pray if you feel that there's some involvement and commitment, not, Lord bless them. So immediately people weren't sure if they could pray, and Rhea immediately had a vision, and so she said, hello, I'm Rhea, we've just arrived, I've just had this vision. And the woman turned around and said, that's where I live. And I felt very strongly the Lord was talking to this woman about Joseph had two sons, Manasseh and Ephraim. And Manasseh means the Lord has caused me to forget. So all that Joseph had been through, the Lord dealt with that. But Ephraim means the Lord will make you fruitful in the land of your affliction. And I just prayed about Ephraim. And she turned around, lifted up the baby and said, this is Ephraim. So that was a connection. Those things don't happen all the time, but when they do, you've got to build them. So, but we just felt, here's a connection. And so the next year, 85, we took a team from Bristol. And then most years since, barring COVID and things like that, we've sent teams over and got very much involved with Jane Lizzie, and who at that time were living in Agra, where the Taj was. And then as their work developed, they moved to Delhi because it was more of a central place. So it was church planting. Their policy was, if they planted a church, they would try to start a school in the slums and a sewing school for women, because women are very disempowered, disenfranchised, and so they wanted to give women skills. And so the Love India part of the Victory Churches is the charitable side in Delhi, working in slums, but in all the other places where they've got churches working in similar situations.
It's always good when you know that the involvement you've got with something has actually proceeded on the word of God, that there's been something prophetic that started it off, so that's really good. Actually, you've just talked about what the second question was. You talked about the sewing schools and the schools in slums. Are there any other activities that Love India's got involved with?
Yeah, a lot of things. We were there several years ago, probably about 15, 16 years ago, and we were talking to one of the pastors who was responsible for a school in the slums. I'm sorry, some of you may have heard this before. I work on the assumption if I can't remember what I said before, you won't. And he was saying that a boy in the school that week had died. He'd just had a basic cut that hadn't been treated, sepsis had set in, and the boy had died. And one of the guys on our team was a doctor, and he said, we can do something about that. So the next year, this doctor took 3 nurses. They handpicked 15, 16 women from that slum area, Guatampuri, and trained them in basic rehydration, hygiene, symptom identifying, just very, very basic stuff. And then a few years after that, my wife, took 2 doctors and a nurse and trained another lot. And since then, we've done ongoing training on HIV, on diet, which is a big thing, on mosquito related diseases. So at the moment, there's about 30 healthcare workers what they assure us is that before this program started, the mortality rate in that pocket of the slum was about 40 infants a year, and since then it's been 0. So amazing differences, really just identifying the hygiene problems, etc. So as a trust, we support, pay the wages for these women, we and try and do ongoing training for them.
I think I'm right in thinking that we've actually paid for one lot of training,
Yeah,
have we?
you did,
With
yeah,
Oldman,
yeah.
I think there was a thing
Yeah.
about shoes, I remember, and then there was a training for some of the health workers. as
You
well.
have been incredibly generous, for which we're grateful.
Yeah, which
Very
is,
grateful.
which is really good. So I'm sure everybody will want to know how the schools, the churches, Love India is coping during the pandemic, especially with India, with it
Yeah.
being so bad.
Working primarily in the slums, they found a couple of interesting things. One is their fear was that if the pandemic spread through the slums, it would be disastrous. It hasn't spread as much as they thought, which they wonder, because living in the slums, your immune system is built up because you're living in squalor, whether that has helped them resist the virus. But the downside was when the government imposed a sudden lockdown, they were given 4 hours. Anybody who worked in the slums, it was mostly a daily job, shoe cleaning, garbage collecting, rickshaw driving, etc. So the issue was then they had no money. So what they're finding in the slums is more of an issue is no money, therefore no food. The schools had to close. Now with the slum schools, and obviously you do a fantastic job in supporting one of those, they feed the children every day. The schools closed, so the teachers and the healthcare workers have been used to just develop a feeding program. And they reckon in the 12, 15 months, over 300,000 people have been fed. In one part of the slum where the school you support is, they haven't got the facilities to cook massive meals, so they give out dry food bags, rice, wheat, dal, lentils, etc. So they give those out there. And the other side of the city, the west side, where they've got a lot of cooking facilities, they do something like 200 weight of rice a day and just feed families. And I've been to many places where people said, we haven't eaten for days. Now recently there was a lockdown imposed for a curfew for 4 days. As soon as that was lifted, the teams went out again and they went to people who said, we haven't eaten since lockdown. So it's really serving an amazing need and purpose, and it's building trust and relationship.
Okay, so obviously we do need to give, and if you are thinking about how, what, where, when, etc., then talk to David, because he will give you sort of the backs information to transfer money in. But it's really good. I think most important, even more important than the giving at the moment, is really, if there was just 2 things we need to pray for, what would you say were the 2 biggest things?
I think grace, energy and provision for the workers. What they have done now, because the needs have increased, they are doing the feeding 4 days a week, which is a mammoth undertaking for all their staff, for the teachers who are doing it. So it's just the ability to keep going. Fortunately, none of those who've been doing the feeding have got COVID, but just this week a pastor that we knew in India died of COVID. A couple of weeks ago, a friend of ours, another pastor, died of COVID. So it is affecting the church. The other complication with that is because churches can't meet. In many countries and contexts, if you don't meet, you can't take an offering, because it's not everybody who's got access to internet banking. And so you've got the tension of many of the churches are struggling financially, so can't do all that they want to do. Many of the pastors have lost all support. So you've got all these sorts of tensions. So it's grace and provision. And the second thing, those 3 things were just one thing. The second thing is just that what Jay and Lizzie feel is that each meal they give is sowing a seed into someone's heart. And there's a trust and an acceptance and a gratitude that has just arisen, that they pray that they'll be able to keep that and work on that and see something of God's kingdom come, as we've been singing on earth, in that awful situation as it is in heaven. This time of the year, again, if you've been to India, you might know this, it's horrendously hot. I mean, we might say it's too hot now, but I've been in India May and June, and you wake up at night and it's 45 degrees, yeah. So in the slums where you've got corrugated roofs, they're freezing in the winter and boiling in the summer. So you've got all that mixture of life going on, and to try and bring some light and hope into that is really important.